Good evening. Happy April 1st. It's a rough one. You know, Typically we associate April with the birth of new life, with the coming of spring. The season of spring had started in March, but visually, um, in April we get those signs of rebirth um, and new life. I don't know where you are today, but from where I sit, the sun is shining. I hear animals outside of my windows who are oblivious to the pain that the human species is currently suffering. And it's rough because we have these visual reminders of a world that's constantly regenerating itself, that's cycling through. But right now we're in this very declining stage where we're getting bombarded with all these negatives and with all these reminders of our mortality. We're hearing about death, we're reading about death. Many of us are personally experiencing grieving a loved one's death. And I read the passages for today. Again, I'm following along with the lectionary on the USCCB site. The Old Testament reading comes from Daniel. So it's the story of when King Nebuchadnezzar throws the three gentlemen into the furnace. And we have the gospel reading, which is a continuation of where we left off from yesterday. So we're still in John 8. We still have Jesus conversing with the same group of people as yesterday. John's interesting. We see in the Johannine text a perspective of Jesus that I feel is maybe a little bit defensive, maybe a little frustrated. The emotion that I am imbibing from these texts and Jesus's encounter with these people is that he's so frustrated with them. It's almost like he's spelling out what they have to do in order to obtain salvation, and he wants it so much for them. And in the other Gospels, when Jesus performs a miraculous deed, or there's some sort of epiphany from a disciple that he encounters, there's almost like this kind of, okay, but we're going to keep it under wraps. Dialogue happens. But Jesus in this passage from John, he is trying his hardest to get the people to understand that he isn't a reincarnated prophet. He's not a celestial being or some new schismatic, a new heretical preacher. He's trying to convey that his existence, his ontological being, is something that they haven't yet seen before. But it is exactly what they all have hoped to one day encounter. I say this because I think the frustration of Jesus in this passage is very important. And he talks a lot about enslavement to our sin in particular, and we see the crowd that he's conversing with they too are very defensive. They take this literally. I think they feel as if they're being belittled. They know their history, the history of the Israelite people. They know of their time in captivity. And it's almost like they're saying to Jesus, you talk as if we're currently bound, as if we currently are under the oppressive regime, which they are. I mean, the Romans are occupying this area. So they are being oppressed. Don't get me wrong, but they're not physically immobilized. And I feel that Jesus very much wants to get through to them that enslavement is more than our physical limitations, right? He's talking about being enslaved to our temptations and to our habits that keep us from putting true faith into God. The things that keep us from allowing ourselves to surrender to God and God's plan for all of us. And, when I struggle with scripture texts, because I'll start to read them, and I think to myself, what in the world am I meant to take from this? And I have to take a step back. Remember that the lectionary was created in such a way that the texts are meant to be read together. So then you have to stop and take each verse that's given to you into consideration of the message that you try to flesh out. And so we see, again, in this Daniel passage, we have 3 men who go against this earthly figure of a king, this earthly ruler. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't have, obviously, the same status of the holy king of Christ. He is someone with material possessions and wealth and power. And these 3 men choose not to succumb to it. Their faith is in a king of all kings. And even though King Nebuchadnezzar commands his guards, and not just any guards, the text say his strongest guards, to bound their limbs so that they are truly immobile, and to be thrown into the fiery furnace, which in any other scenario would result in a bodily death and a physical deterioration. Because King Nebuchadnezzar believes that this is the ultimate punishment, the ultimate torture, the ultimate suffering that one can undergo. But these 3 men understand something greater, which is the worst punishment that one can undergo is separation from God, right? Separation from the divine, separation from their creator. And they hold fast to their faith, and they're vocal about it. The lectionary doesn't include for today the deuterocanonical text of the prayer. It kind of just jumps over it. But there is almost a joyous feeling amongst the comrades that they're just excited in their faith. So, like I'm trying to look at this through the eyes of COVID-19, and I see, obviously, physical death, as we all do. And there's no denying that. I'm trying not to make these reflections focused, hyper-focused on the physical death of these passages. But I do see the connection between the difference between our physical holdings and our spiritual ones. So right now, we might feel, because we're being contained for the sake of all people, which is fabulous. But I think there's a big difference between someone externally setting you free, when we do get the okay from the health experts and the government officials to allow us to be in physical community with people again. But then there is our spiritual enslavement as well. And there's so much that we can't do right now because we have no choice. And I really want to think more about my personal willingness to sacrifice things. We all feel like I've seen, as I'm sure you have, the meme, this is the lentiest Lent I've ever lented. And that's completely out of our control, but to remember our Lenten sacrifices that we willingly make. Giving our time for others is something that I talked about in a meeting last night. Actually, I should rephrase that. My mentor, my teacher, had said that, and it opened up a light bulb for me, that our time right now, if we don't have the financial means, or obviously we cannot be with another face-to-face in person, what can we do that can sacrifice all this free time that we now have? So that's my word. I'll think more about that. Peace and good. Bye-bye.